So what changes the color and taste of beer?
Many things, but to start would immediately be the different malts or grains used in the batch. In today's beer, we are using, aside from a pale malt, we're going to be using some amber malt, which gives it a robust red color along with some toasted notes, and then a caramel 60 Lavibon, which will give it a little bit more color, but predominantly more of a body and overall sweeter taste to the beer. Some other factors that go into beer flavor are the temperatures in which the grain is steeped at. So if it is steeped anywhere from 155 to 158, there is an alpha amylase enzyme active in the mash, which provides a different end product than the 143 to 155 temperature range, where the beta amylase enzyme is active, which gives it a little bit more of a drier finish. Another component to beer flavor is the actual yeast itself. During fermentation, depending on the temperature of fermentation, there can be more flavor prominent from the yeast and the hops, which are added during the boil.
So does pH play a role at all on your brewing process?
It does, especially during the mash process or when the grain is steeping in the water. The target pH is anywhere from 5.2 to 5.5, and the reason for that is that the increase of acidity helps extract not only the sugars but also the adjuncts or unfermentables within the grain itself. If the pH is too high, we will not extract what is needed for the yeast during the fermentation.
So speaking in microbiology terms, I know that beer is part of an anaerobic alcohol fermentation. Can you give me a timeline of the brewing process, especially on the fermenting process?
Sure. So it all starts with the malting process, which we won't get into detail, but it's essentially where it all begins in the grain and the barley. We take that barley, mill it down to expose the endosperm and aquaspirin along the stored starches, and we put that into what we call the mash tun, where we steep the grain, which activates different enzymes, which was mentioned before. Depending on which enzymes are active will depend on the kind of sugar or food that we will have to provide to the yeast later down in the process. After we mash, we then water or rinse the grain with hot water to stop that enzymatic process, and then we boil that what is called wort for many reasons, but during the boil we also add hops, which is a great way to balance the sweetness of the wort with the bittering agents of the hops. Hops are also a natural preservative, so it kind of helps with that. It provides some nutrients for the yeast. After we boil for about 60 minutes to 90 minutes, after boiling and cooling down the wort, we move the beer down into the fermentation vessel, where the anaerobic fermentation takes place for about 4 days after the yeast pretty much becomes acclimated to its environment. And then during the anaerobic fermentation, we can expect anywhere from 40 to 60% of the sugars to be consumed during that time for reproduction of the fungi or of the Saccharomyces. After that, it turns into secondary fermentation, which lasts about 10 to 15 days. From there, we would take the yeast out the bottom, transfer the beer into another vessel, and call that conditioning, where any remaining yeast cells would then continue to break down the more complex sugars remaining left in the beer. That can last anywhere from an additional 10 to 30 days. Once we're satisfied with the overall flavor and where we want the beer to be, we would then cold crash, it's called, getting the beer very cold, making all the sediment drop to the bottom. We then take all that sediment out and prepare it for serving.